we will add her into the discussion. So good morning, good morning. Welcome all of those of you that have decided to attend this great session. This is one of our first breakout sessions during the Economic Outlook State of Recovery, and we're going to focus on restaurant and retail reimagined. If you will go with us there to reimagine restaurants and retails. I am Candace Simmons. I am a small business owner here in Culver City of All That and More Boutique. I'm also a chair ambassador for the Culver City Chamber, and I'm so excited to be your moderator for this session this morning. I have two amazing panelists thus far that have great and amazing industry background, and I'm excited to engage them in conversation. The attendees, we encourage you to put your comments or questions in the comment box there. And if we have time at the end of the session, we will go to your questions. We have several questions prepared for our panelists, and we know that they're more than capable of responding to. So when you think about it, where we currently are right now, there's probably a lot of questions that many of us have, things that we've all had to work through during this time. If you are a retail owner or a restaurant owner, we know that you're excited to hear the outlook. How can we move forward? How can we recover? There's so many things that have happened that have impacted our industry. A lot of us will say we're probably one of the hardest hit industries as it relates to restaurant and retail. We know that there's a lot going on. There's things that we know we need to do going forward as we look towards recovery. So that's what this panel discussion will be about. Our panelists are, we currently have Wally Marks, who is the general manager for Walter N. Marks and Helms Bakery. We also have Greg Moreno, owner of Albright Restaurant. And woohoo, we also now have Rachel. You're right on time. We couldn't have planned this any better. We look like magicians up here. We also have Rachel Michelet, the president of the California Retailers Association. And with that being said, that was my brief introduction to our panelists. But I want to turn it over to our panelists now to give us an introduction. And I'd also like for you to share what your outlook is for your current industry. So I will start with Wally. If you could share with us again who you are, your background, and give us some outlook into the industry.
Candace, thank you very much. Wally Marks, for those that don't know me. I run our family business. Back in the 70s, we were very fortunate to purchase the Helms Bakery building, about 11 acres that straddles both cities, Culver City and Los Angeles. So I studied a little architecture in school and ended up in engineering, but really have a passion about placemaking and believe that owning real estate is a privilege and not a right. And so it's really a great blessing that we have stewardship, if you will, of this great iconic building. So with that, I think that's really about our background, and we've always been retransforming or reimagining the bakery over the decades. So this will be another blip, and we'll get into more detail later.
Awesome, thank you. Greg, you're up next.
Thanks, Candace. So I spent about 20 years in the fashion business. I started out as an entrepreneur and turned into an executive for many, many years. I've always been serving the community in one way or another. I started out as a high school football coach and still do that as much as I can because I just love it. Continue to mentor kids at Santa Monica High School and elsewhere throughout the city. That led into more and more community service on a number of boards and commissions, and landed on the city council in Santa Monica for a couple years. Recently had to step off to help manage our family business, which is a restaurant on the Santa Monica Pier, and to renegotiate our lease that the city of Santa Monica owns. So I'm quite familiar with municipal management of assets and the challenges that we all face now going into the recovery of the pandemic.
Awesome, thank you. Rachel, you can give us a little bit about your background and any outlook you have for your industry.
now it's technology and dogs. I mean, seriously, it's kind of been one of those mornings. Well, thank you for having me. I'm with the California Retailers Association, and it's been a ride. We just recently were able to work to get retail open at 20% capacity between, in the shelter-in-place orders. My biggest concern is really our small retailers and independent retailers across the state. It's very important to me that we do everything we can to help them, because this is a critical time, and I want to make sure that they have every resource in order to stay open so that they continue to be open once we get past the pandemic. But it's tough. I every day I'm advocating for small businesses at the legislature, and particularly now with the administration. And I'm curious to see how things, pan out in the next couple of weeks. It's a 2 steps forward, sometimes 3 steps back, right? Just when you think you're getting a handle on everything, that wave comes back and knocks you down, and you have to get up and keep going.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And thank you all for sharing, and thank you all for agreeing to be a part of our panel discussion this morning. So the first question that I would like to ask, as I mentioned earlier, fewer industries have been hit harder than those of restaurants. Can you briefly share the impacts of the pandemic and the great loss you've seen in the various industries that you represent? So I'd like to start that question with having you respond, Greg, please.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wallop for sure. I think when the initial shutdown happened, it was 3 weeks, right? And we all assumed, well, we'll be back on our feet, and it's temporary. Is how this whole thing started, and very quickly we realized that it wasn't going to be temporary. And it was at that moment, we came together. There was a number of operators and industry professionals who were trying to figure out what to do. We knew that advocacy was going to be a big deal. We knew that cities have traditionally been challenged with managing restaurants and how to deal with us, because we're a prickly bunch. And so it was by good fortune, we as the Independent Hospitality Coalition came together. So myself and about 10 others all had different groups, all had different restaurants. We all brought dozens of different restaurants together. And so today we represent about 400 restaurants, about 25,000 employees, and formed the Independent Hospitality Coalition. So independenthospitality.org was formed. We recently hired an executive director, and we've been, on the warpath, so to speak, in advocacy and trying to change policy. Politicians, I know I was one for quite some time, recovering today, don't quite understand how operations work. And so I have that very unique experience of seeing both sides of the dais, so to speak. And it's through that advocacy and the Independent Hospitality Coalition, I think we've made some strides, and I think are earning our seat at the table. And that's ultimately what it is. We need to have a voice. We need to share with folks our experience and how they can be helpful. And municipalities are challenged by how they can be helpful. They can't just give us money. That's not the resource that we're looking for. So being creative is our job. And being a part of that discussion is absolutely critical in the recovery.
I agree. Thank you so much, Greg. Rachel, if you could respond to the same question, can you briefly share the impacts of the pandemics and the great loss you've seen in your industry?
It's always sad when I get calls, particularly from our smaller retailers who are, closing up or, Greg, I totally relate on the restaurant side. I think the biggest challenge that has been and the biggest frustration is really, and I know in LA County with the court cases, the lack of data to justify all of the closures of these businesses. And that's something we fought from the beginning. This pandemic hit in March. No one knew what was going on, and everyone just shut down because we didn't know. But when we're 8 months or 9 months into this, I think that there can be some more micro targeting of different industries. I've always said on the retail side, if there's a retailer who's not following the guidelines, shut them down. right? I mean, shut down the bad actors, but there are so many businesses, whether it's a restaurant or a small retailer, who have invested thousands of dollars in PPE. They have trained their employees. They've done everything that they have been asked to do to stay open. And my argument today, there was an article that came out of Yale that actually said, we're starting to see the backlash that closing down businesses is actually counterproductive to stopping the spread of COVID. That by going into some of these businesses, a restaurant, a retail establishment that is so hyper focused on safety precautions, is actually safer to do that. And really, we've got to address the issue, which is the transmissions that happening through these backyard parties or holiday parties or whatever you want to talk about. And so I think for us, it's going to be, I'm anticipating Q1 next year. We're going to see more small businesses close. We're going to do everything we can to keep that from happening. But until we start really looking at the fact that, I'm worried we're dealing hyper-focused, which we should be absolutely, on this health pandemic while we're ignoring the economic pandemic that I think can have just as much devastation, both from an economic standpoint, from a health standpoint. And we need to start talking about that as well.
Yes, and the mental health as well. Yes.
Correct, mental health, absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Wally, can you also
Sure.
answer the same question, please?
Yeah, so I don't see customers, I don't see the public. My clients are people like Greg, who has a restaurant. My clients at the Helms Bakery, as you all know, are furniture stores for the most part, restaurants, and then I have a lot of office space as well. One of the things that I really stood on, and what I really urge those that are viewing this or will see it recorded, is really the relationship. What I did back in March was I didn't want to wait around to see in April if Greg, for example, was going to send me a rent check in the first week of the month. I reached out to Greg. I called him by the 15th of March and said, we got to talk. What's happening for you? Where are you going? We're going to have to shoulder this together. And getting data, as Rachel just said, was far and few between back then and continued for months and months. So I was basically, on the phone with every single tenant, talking with them, being proactive. I didn't want to wait around, like I said, till April 1 and find out what's what. That's a differentiating factor from what our approach is. I knew what we had to do here at the bakery was to make this place feel welcoming, clean. We did a huge amount of messaging, and we also prepped and trained our crews to be hypersensitive. And really what we need to do is exude confidence so that when coming here, if you so choose, would be a really safe endeavor and that you felt comfortable. And luckily, for the most part, the furniture stores have done well or well enough during this time, but that's a different conversation. I know it's not what your question was. And we've been busy. We really have. From the furniture side of things and restaurants a bit too. So hope that helps.
That's great.
But I would just urge having a relationship with landlords. I know sometimes it just doesn't happen, but this is when the fit hits the shan, and this is when you need each other. And this is not the time to start relationships. It's the time to cash in on each other's relationships to find a solution. So.
All right. Well, thank you. Yes, being proactive in those relationships are so important. Okay. So when we think about the care that Culver City has taken to build the culinary as well as the retail scene over the past decade, how long do you envision it taking those industries to return to where we were in 2019? So I'd like to ask that question and start with you, Rachel.
That's a great question. And part of the challenge is that, I think it's going to take we're still in this for probably another 6 to 9 months, right? I mean, it's going to take a while to get the vaccine out. It's going to take a while to get enough folks vaccinated to where we can get back to some normalcy like we had prior to COVID.
Right.
So maybe I'm hopeful that this time next year, when we hit kind of the holiday season, we'll be back to normal. So you can back to having, your holiday parties in your restaurants and, the shopping and all of that. So I think that will be the beginning of the recovery. But, we've got to wait and see really what damage has been done, right? I mean, how many restaurants are still going to be around? How many retailers are still going to be around? I mean, we don't have that yet. And
Right.
so, we've got to kind of assess next year, figure out where we're at, and then look at it. But I try to be an internal optimist. You kind of have to be right now. And I'm hopeful that by, end of next summer, we can turn the corner and start that real robust recovery piece. And I have a lot of faith in Californians and people in Culver City and customers. And I think everyone wants to come back. I think we all want to be able to go into a restaurant and just hang out with our friends. And people want to support small businesses. So I'm hopeful once folks feel like they can do that safely, it'll be a quicker recovery than we think.
Yes, we're hopeful right there with you too. So Greg, can you answer the same question as well?
Yeah. And thanks for the I think it's the question, right? I mean, you heard Gorn talking about it, done some recovery work planning.
Right.
Santa Monica has done, and it's that type of forward planning, I think, that is critical. The big challenge, as I see it, or one of the big challenges, is that government hasn't typically been focused on small business.
Mm-hmm.
There's been the Small Business Administration, there's different EDCs or community corporations, but government and how to work with small business hasn't been a priority for so long. And so independent retailers are challenged in this state. If you can go to any of the sort of large economic forecast, and you'll see like a 2024 high line is the date. But a lot of that depends on tourism. A lot of that depends on where you fall within the industry. Our business on the Santa Monica Pier is largely impacted by tourism. And until people feel comfortable getting on a plane and coming to check out the Santa Monica Pier, it's not going to recover until 2024, where we've got a couple of delis throughout LA, and those businesses are doing great. Completely different model, to-go model, technology-based model. So it really depends, I think, on what industry you're in, and specifically, what your demographic is, and that plays the biggest factor in all of this. And then, of course, what becomes the most important with all of this is having the independents, having the small business folks at the table, right? We can't be dictated to about what someone thinks is the right thing for us. It just doesn't work. We have to have a voice at that table, and we're doing that through advocacy and the Independent Hospitality Coalition. But independent retailers have to have a voice. We have to be heard. And I think Wally's remarks were perfect. I mean, God, I wish every single landlord had reached out to their tenant in April and said, hey, how are we going to solve this problem? Because we have a problem. And I think, your point was perfectly made, is that it's time to cash in on those relationships. And, if there is an opportunity, us retailers, and whether it's through BOMA or some other real estate association, we need to connect. And then those voices need to carry forward to the state and the feds, so that when we ask for relief from our landlords, that same relief is given to the landlords from the banks. And that's the type of advocacy and throughput that we need from the top to the bottom.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, Wally, can you share your thoughts as well?
Sure. Thoughts about it are, there's a slide about e-commerce that was happening, and obviously it got steeper and accelerated. All of us, get involved in some form of e-commerce and ordering food and deliveries and all that. I'm hopeful, like Rachel, being an optimist, that there's a need for, your local retail. But keep in mind also, retail doesn't exist if the second floor, everything above it, doesn't exist. For example, right now at the bakery, we have a strong lunch crowd, but that's based on offices. That's based on second floor. That's based on everyone above ground level. So that's not here, and therefore there's a real suffering. So I'm hoping that the second floor is also part of that conversation and isn't forgotten. The other issue is, because of the slide of e-commerce, the brick and mortar's got to look spectacular. If you don't do brick and mortar well, your online's not going to do well. Because if you're just online only, then good luck competing with Amazon or, making a few dollars doing that. So what you would say, Greg, about loans or money, there's a lot of money that needs to start up to reinvent your store, to reinvent your customer service, to train staff to really be attentive. One of the things that I personally experienced is really poor customer service, on the online experience and all that, where I want to go see the proprietor. I want to go see the folks that love what they do and do what they love in retail or in food service, hospitality. I mean, hospitality is everything. We're always selling. So I think that's something that's got to happen in the next 6 to 9 months that Rachel was saying about when she thinks this is coming back. There's articles about a roaring 20s that we're going to have like 100 years ago. Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think there's going to be more celebration and people wanting to get out and be with their friends and have more dinner parties and engagements like that. But when it gets to retail, just to reiterate, the store's got to look spectacular. Now we have a lot more choices. And so I think that's really vital.
Awesome. Thank you. So the question I'd like to ask at this point, what would you say to the everyday consumer about how they can best support the restaurants and the retail sectors during and after the pandemic?
I mean, I'll go first because I have the shortest answer. It's like, show up, you have to care. You want to make sure that the Albright on the pier is going to be there. You have to, go buy gift cards, give them a loan, basically, go do something. All of us have been, I think most people, their bills have been a lot lower because we're not spending as much. So there's a bit of that. That's what I would, just hopefully, have confidence. This too shall pass. I think that was one of those sayings back in March. They were quoting some biblical verse or something, and it will. It will. So, okay.
That's great.
I would probably first and foremost, particularly for retail, is just follow the guidelines as a customer. Wear your face mask, be polite, don't throw a temper tantrum and because you don't want to wear a face mask. I mean, we are all trying to keep particularly our small businesses open, and there's a responsibility customers and consumers have, which is, thank the people working, follow the 6 feet, social distancing. Go in and out and do your shopping. We've got on our website a bunch of tips on safe holiday shopping. But, and I think Wally's right too. If you can't right now necessarily go in and purchase something, purchase a gift card, and let your business that you're going to be there, when we get past this. Especially our restaurants. My husband and I try to, 2 to 3 times a week do takeout because we love our local restaurants and we want them to be around because we want to be able to go back to them, when we get past this. So I think really just being nice to people. I can't say that enough. I mean, the stories we went through on the face coverings and people yelling and screaming, it's not worth it right now. We're close to hopefully turning a corner. So just really, support your businesses. And a great way to do that is by just following the guidelines.
Right. I agree. I know one of the things.
Frozen.
So, Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, good.
Well,
She's
You're frozen for a moment.
Here in.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I did keep spinning. I thought you could still hear me, but what I was saying was to your comments earlier about being being nice, and also the environment. So as a retailer, we want our space to look really nice. And one of the things and look welcoming, but due to the pandemic, we have had to lock our doors because folks want to come in without a face mask. And we're like, okay, you can't come in without a face mask. And to your point, Rachel, adhering to those guidelines would really be helpful to the retailers and the folks that you're engaging with. So that's really important. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I
Greg,
think Rachel and
please
Wally are
respond
both
to
right.
the same question.
I mean, you have to be safe, right? You have to wear your mask. You just have to do the basic things. I think common courtesy in society. I mean, we're going to get to this point where, it's all about, loving one another and really showing that love by taking appropriate precautions, right? Like thanking someone for working, right? Like that doesn't happen. We've taken all of this for granted. And so this is really an opportunity for us to, I think, upgrade our morality. It really seems like that is the opportunity here. And to Wally's point, the concept of looking good and training and, being a better retailer, I think that has a lot of merit. The only thing I would add to it is that you do have to reinvent. And if you were, an online mom and pop shop, or a retailer in store, you have to go online. If you were a restaurant, you have to figure out the app business. You have to figure out to-goes. So you do have to reinvent. You have to figure out how to sell furniture online. I mean, this was a really big craze 10 years ago when people were going online. And I think now there's another sort of large revolution in that regard. And then on top of it, I think it's not just the way it looks, but it's the way that it operates. And we're not quite there yet, but we're getting really, really close about like better equipment, better technology to make that in-store experience better or to make the food production better per se. So those types of investments are going to be critical. Where we get the capital, I think, is the big question in that regard. But, if everyone can take a little bit of the burden, I think that is what we need right now. And obviously there was a court case with the CRA and the county, and the courts ruled in favor of the CRA, the California Restaurants Association, because you can't just shut down an industry arbitrarily, right? And so the politicians have their role in this process as well, right? They have to understand that, the economy takes all of us, including them. And I think that that really big idea of us all working together and, rising waters raise all ships, it's time to realize that and take the appropriate steps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you guys have shared some really great points. And when you think about your respective industries, have you seen certain things that have really worked where folks have had to pivot and they've implemented something that you think our viewers could really benefit from considering in your various industries?
Yeah.
I'd like to
obviously
start with
moving
Greg.
online, Rachel goes out a few nights a week. And so we have to be able to adapt to that changing model. That's different. I don't know if Rachel did that before, but if she's doing it now, multiplied by, millions of people, we have to be able to service that need. They put some policy in place. I mean, we were screaming about this before as restaurateurs, but, the delivery apps were raking us prior to the pandemic. I mean, it was horrible. They would take 35%, sometimes more, of each ticket that we sold, which basically leaves us with no profit. And their conception was, well, you've got people there working, so you guys don't need profit, give it to us. And that sort of unconscious business practice is just greedy, to be honest with you. And that's what kills the small business. And so what we need is some conscious evolution kind of in the operations of the retailers. But then we also need the folks, the politicians who are making the rules to support us, right? I mean, that's why we started the Independent Hospitality Coalition. That's why I'm here talking about this, is to try and, build up our community from the top down, right? And that involves our electeds. That, we made a choice at the polls this November, and we need to keep pushing on that right now more than ever. We need a seat at the table.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Wally? Anything you've seen folks do that you think is really beneficial that our
I
viewers
can
could
speak about
benefit from
at Helms,
implementing?
our furniture stores. Sometimes it was by appointment only. Limiting the access. I think the number of employees in some of our stores were reduced, so the number of customers. It was weird seeing lines, people waiting to get into a furniture store. It's like, why are we doing this? But it was real, and it was somewhat. I think it's more at this point survival more than success. I think just talking about the restaurant side, it's interesting we talk about, and Greg, you said about delivery, but today's a day, I think it's DoorDash is having their IPO, And I'm not so worried about DoorDash because I don't find them a differentiating factor. I don't think they're relevant. I think that you could be Uber Eats or you can be Amazon or OpenTable, whatever the other delivery systems can be. So why DoorDash? I think the messaging is really the key thing for small business, is to say, do you realize that when you order on DoorDash, we don't make any money? And if we continue doing this, we're not going to be able to be your local bar, your local restaurant, your local place where you want to hang out and meet people. So I think that's part of it that we have to do, is to message that, whether you have that on your receipt or you make it clear. I think a few years back, we had that health surcharge that some restaurants tried to implement to say, hey, we're trying to provide healthcare, and we need your assistance as a consumer. So I think that's a key element that we could do on an individual basis. And I think there's enough people in the population that would respond positively to say, you're right, and there are other ways of having delivery. I mean, we grew up with the pizza delivery. We grew up with things. Some things don't deliver well, by the way. Some foods are not favorable to be delivered. I mean, I'll take French fries. It's not a good element. So anyway, I think that's just it's all about messaging and its reach and knowing your customer, just like I need to know my tenants and have a relationship. I think for the most part, you have a core, Greg, you probably have a core customers at every establishment, and there's a way to reach them.
Thank you. We're actually getting close to our
Oh,
closing
sure. I'll go really
here,
fast. I think
I also
Wally hit
would
the
like
nail
for
on
you
the
to
head
share as well,
earlier too,
Rachel.
is that what we saw were small retailers in particular who never had an online presence. I think this showed that you need to complement your business with an online presence. I was blown away by some businesses really utilizing social media, Instagram, Facebook, to showcase their items, to get their customers in. I think that customer loyalty is really important, and it goes back to really having that relationship. I think Greg is right. I think we're going to move. I'm hopeful that this might move people to, I'm all for shopping online on some things, but I think it's also important. I think people are going to crave being able to go into a store, going into a restaurant. The other thing quickly that I've been impressed is really the partnerships between restaurant and retail. I always, my colleague Jod over at the Restaurant Association, I always say we're like hand in hand. I mean, we do all kinds of, it's like the Rachel and Jot shows sometimes when we go out and speak, because we're so dependent on each other. And watching and bringing in what local city councils have done around the state to really provide opportunities for both restaurant and retail to thrive in these just really unique circumstances. I'm hopeful that some of that will stick, maybe not on a constant basis, but on special occasions, because I think people really enjoyed that. So those are just some of the observations that I've had over the last couple of months.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being a part of our panel discussion. You gave some really great, insightful tips and best practices for us all to consider as we reimagine restaurant and retail going forward. At the Chamber, we wish all of you the best. To all of our viewers that are watching, please remember to click on at the end of the session. You leave the session and then click on sessions to attend your next session. So thank you for all of you for attending this morning, and we wish you the best as you reimagine retail and the restaurant industry. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great morning. Enjoy your session.